You know that bike ride you take after work? The one just to clear your head? Well, it might be doing a whole lot more than just getting you some exercise. What if I told you it's actually leaving behind a digital footprint, one that could help build the city of tomorrow?
So, how does that even work? I mean, have you ever wondered how a city decides, yep, we're going to put a bike lane right here? It's a massive investment, right? They can't just guess. So, where do they get their information from?
Well, the traditional way, it looks a lot like this. And thanks to the researchers at Western Michigan University who did this study, we can see the old school method in action. You basically stick a camera on a pole, or maybe you've even seen someone with a clipboard and a clicker, and you just count the bikes as they go one by one.
And right away, that brings us to a huge issue, what we could call the counting conundrum. Because, it sounds simple enough, but trying to do that across an entire city, it's a nightmare. I mean, think about the problems here. First, it's super expensive. You need people, you need equipment for every single location. Second, it's so time-consuming. Can you imagine having to watch hundreds of hours of video just counting cyclists? But the biggest problem? You're only getting a tiny, tiny snapshot. You might know what's happening on this one corner, but you have zero idea what's going on across the rest of the city. You're missing the big picture.
Okay, so if the old way is too slow, too expensive, and just doesn't scale, what's the alternative? Well, this is where things get really interesting. The solution might just be sitting in our pockets, thanks to the digital revolution.
And the key idea here is something called crowdsourcing. You've definitely heard of it, right? At its heart, it's just about getting a tiny bit of info from a ton of people to solve one big problem. So instead of one person trying to count 1,000 bikes, what if 1,000 cyclists could just count themselves? And that's the big light bulb moment. What if you didn't need to count them at all? What if the data was just already out there, being created totally voluntarily by millions of cyclists using fitness apps on their phones every single day?
Wow, just look at this. This is a heat map from the fitness app Strava, and it shows the incredible potential. Each glowing line is an anonymized bike ride in Michigan. All of a sudden, you go from counting bikes on a single street corner to seeing the glowing arteries of an entire state cycling network. The level of detail is it's mind-blowing.
But, and this is a huge but, as amazing as this data looks, it's not the full story, not even close. In fact, if planners just used this data by itself, they'd get a really, really skewed picture of what's actually going on. So check this out. The researchers actually went out and surveyed cyclists in a couple of Michigan cities, and what they found was kind of shocking. A full 2/3 of cyclists, that's 66%, don't use any tracking app at all. So those Strava users who made that beautiful map, they're only about 16% of all the cyclists out there. The big takeaway here is we're only seeing a tiny piece of the pie. And it gets even more complicated when you look at why people are riding. It turns out the type of person who uses an app is, pretty specific. Almost half of the people riding for fun, recreational riders, they use an app. But what about people just trying to get to work? Only 22% of them do. So right away, the data is way more about weekend warriors than daily commuters. So put yourself in a city planner's shoes for a second. If you only look at this app data, you'd think every cyclist is a guy, probably an expert rider, out for a long recreational ride on a beautiful trail. And you would totally miss the person who's just trying to bike to their job on a busy, maybe not so safe street. This isn't just a nerdy data problem. This is a real-world planning problem that affects people's lives. So, what do? You've got this small but super accurate data set from the cameras. And then you've got this huge but really biased data set from the apps. What's the answer? Well, you don't pick one, you combine them. And this is where data science comes in to save the day. Actually, there's a great way to think about this. It's kind of like a weather forecast, right? Meteorologists can't just look at satellite images of clouds, and they can't just look at the temperature from a single weather station on the ground. To get a good forecast, they need to combine both the big picture and the super precise local data. It's the exact same idea here. So here's the genius part of what the researchers did. First, they took those accurate on-the-ground camera counts. Then, they layered in that massive but flawed Strava dataset. They fed all of it into a machine learning model. This one's called a random forest. And the name is actually a good way to picture it. Think of it like a whole team of experts, where each expert looks at the data from a slightly different angle. By putting all their heads together, the model gets really good at spotting the hidden patterns and the biases in the Strava data,
and then it learns how to correct for them. What you get at the end is a way, way more accurate picture of bike traffic across the entire city.
So the big question is, did it actually work? What's the payoff for all this complicated data stuff? Well, the results are pretty clear, and honestly, they've got some massive implications for how we build smarter cities.
Okay, let's start with the baseline. When the researchers tried to predict bike traffic using just the traditional data, stuff like census info, land use, their model was about 65% accurate. Which, okay, is not terrible, but for a multi-million-dollar project, that's still a pretty big margin of error.
But now, watch this. When they added the corrected Strava data into the mix, the model's predictive power jumped up to 71%. Now, I know, a 6% jump might not sound like a lot, but in the world of city planning, that is a huge deal. That's a massive improvement. By combining these two different types of data, they basically built a tool that gives them a much, much clearer picture of where people actually ride their bikes. And this is what it's all about. This isn't just some dusty academic paper. This new model gives real city planners like the ones in Ann Arbor a way better map of where people are actually cycling. And that means they can make much smarter, data-driven decisions about where to spend our money on new bike lanes and trails. The researchers really hit the nail on the head in their report. They said the whole point is to give planners a reliable way to estimate bicycle exposure. That's just a fancy term for figuring out how many bikes are on any given road. And when you have more reliable data, you make smarter investments. And that means better, safer bike lanes for everybody, not just the people using an app. So all this leaves us with a final, really big question. This study was brilliant for cycling, right? Combining old and new data. But what's next? What other digital breadcrumbs are we all leaving behind every day? Think about it. Data from delivery apps, from our transit cards, maybe even from social media. How could all of that data be used to build the smarter, more responsive cities we all want to live in?